Okay, this is part 19, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. We've seen how the Venetians were curiously involved with the forming of the Jesuit order, but also with the Lutherans and even with King Henry VIII of England. At this time, there was a heightened rivalry between Venice and Genoa. The Genoese were flourishing on the silver being brought back on Spanish ships that they financed. This threatened the very Venetian control of silver. The two great powers of Europe at this time were the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire and the Kingdom of France. Habsburg Charles V had been elected over King Francis I of France for the office of Holy Roman Emperor. Charles needed cooperation with Lutheran princes of Germany in his struggle with France and the Turks, who were in league with Francis. By this time, the Habsburgs controlled large parts of Western Europe. They even married Catherine of Aragon to Henry VIII of England in hopes of sealing an alliance between England and Spain. They wanted the English to protect the English Channel for the Habsburgs. They were shipping large tax revenues from Holland, which they had inherited through marriage. But the Venetians appeared to plot to disrupt the alliance of England and Spain. They seemed to bring about the divorce of Henry VIII and Catherine. The Habsburgs controlled Bohemia, which meant the silver mines, and they were also bringing back silver on Spanish ships from the New World. So the Habsburgs and their Genoese financiers were getting more control of European silver. So the Venetians saw the need to acquire more access to the Atlantic Ocean as the Genoese had done. Genoa was usually allied with the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. The Venetians were forming ties with noble families of England. The powerful English Cardinal Reginald Pole also had ties to Venice. Henry VIII's financial advisor was Thomas Cromwell, who had been a clerk for the Italian bank Frescobaldi and was taught in Italian banking techniques. Cromwell used the powerful publishing houses of Venice to import Protestant books and tracts into England. And the sex advisor of Henry VIII was also a Venetian, the Kabbalist Francesco Zorzi. Calvinist sects grew rapidly at this time, but oddly they appeared to operate very closely with Venetian influence and direction. At first the Lutheran Church had operated in conjunction with the Venetians, but it seems the Lutherans were too peaceable. So the more militant Calvinists would become more attractive as a tool for the Venetians, and Calvinism flourished especially with merchants who were often tied to Venice. The founder of the movement, John Calvin, had come to Geneva, Switzerland at about the same time that the Jesuit order was established. He had studied in Paris with some of the same professors and subjects as Ignatius Loyola. His name may have been an alteration of the Jewish name Cohen. What's even more likely is that he had some instruction from rabbis. Calvinists and other Protestant movements still considered themselves to be Catholic. It's just that they believed they were reforming the church, which had been desired for many centuries. Venetians like Cardinal Contarini saw no difference in Protestant churches and Catholic, except in matters of structures of authority, what's known as the magisterium. But Calvin's important doctrine of predestination appears to be really the Stoic tenet of fatalism, and his doctrine of total depravity appears to be just an excuse for a Stoic form of universal government. Calvin himself had admitted that his doctrines were just a recapitulation of the doctrines of Augustine of Hippo, which have also been shown to be of Stoic and Gnostic origin. Calvinism grew rapidly, especially in large cities. In France it flourished in Languedoc, not far from Geneva, Calvinism's main base, where curiously there was also a large population of Jews, so-called, and Cathars. Calvinism also moved into Holland from France. Many Jews also came to Holland at the same time Calvinism was growing there. The Spanish Habsburg rulers now had a place to which they could expel Jews. The Jews would certainly work as tax collectors, bringing large tax revenues to the Habsburgs. The Calvinists would be persecuted heavily by the Catholic rulers of both France and Holland. Calvinism also flourished at this time along the Rhine in Germany, where it was protected by the Palatine Elector. There was a large merchant class along the Rhine. The Elector Palatine also protected Jews and Kabbalists, as well as mystery schools and the forerunners of Freemasonry. Most strange of all is that many Italian refugees of so-called Calvinist faith started moving into Poland in the 1540s. You wonder if they were refugees from Venice, which had been devastated in the wars of the League of Cambrai. It's a bit odd because Italians were usually Catholic. It appears the Venetians were behind this. These so-called Calvinist refugees were no doubt some kind of agitators, and they also came along with Jews. By this time, the ruling princes of Poland allowed synagogues in their kingdom, which became some of the most important rabbinical institutions in all of Europe. A corresponding disappearance of synagogues in Venice seemed connected, so the so-called Jews appeared to move from Venice to Poland. Also, the Teutonic Knights of Prussia secularized their lands and placed them under the sovereignty of the King of Poland. They forsook the Catholic Church and threw their support behind the Lutheran Church. In 1555, the Peace of Augsburg put an end to much of the strife between Lutherans and Catholics. The Habsburgs undoubtedly used the peace to gain support against France. The peace effectively unified the Church, and the term Protestant mostly applied to differences in rights at church councils, not to doctrine itself, which echoed the views of Cardinal Contarini. And even though John Calvin curiously agreed with the terms of the peace, Calvinists and also Anabaptists would not be protected under the peace. This would make beleaguered Calvinists an even more potent force in the hands of the Venetians. Protestants in France, mostly Calvinist Huguenots, had been staunchly opposed and persecuted by the Valois kings of France, but Huguenots would play an important part in a struggle for the French throne, which was misleadingly labeled as the Wars of Religion that began in 1562 with the slaughter of Huguenots at Vassy. The Valois kings gave some protection to Protestants in return for helping them fight the Guise family. Some of the other nobility in France actually became Protestant and backed the Protestants, but the Valois kings often reneged on their promises to the Protestants in their kingdom. The Merovingian Guise family had defied the French monarchs for centuries, ultimately attempting to take the throne itself. The Guise and related Lorraine family outwardly backed Catholic factions, but there is evidence that they also used Protestants secretly for their purposes. The Cardinal of Lorraine attempted to decentralize the papacy and bring it under the authority of secular rulers. The Lorraine and related Guise families were able to ultimately destroy the Valois dynasty. The Guise family also used marriage to the Stuart kings of Scotland to strengthen ties with Scotland against England. The Guise and Lorraine families also married into families of none other than Venice, like the Este family, as well as the Gonzagas of Mantua. In 1571, at the sea battle of Lepanto, the Turkish navy and France indirectly suffered an important defeat by what is known as the Holy League. Even though Venice benefited from the victory over the Turks at Lepanto, it wasn't enough for a growing radical faction of Venetians that believed the lagoons of Venice were no longer tenable for the success of the Venetian trading and banking empire. This faction pointed to the recent routing of the Venetian military and near destruction of its city, known as the Giovanni. They believed that Christianity was in the way of the true Venetian system and way of life. An older, more conservative faction known as Vecchi still wanted to give allegiance to the Pope, but also to neutralize the power of the Pope. The Giovanni resolved to destroy Christianity, and that meant to bring down both the papacy and the Habsburgs with it. The Giovanni also believed kings had too much power and needed to be controlled. As part of their plan, they would operate both the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation, playing both sides against each other with the purpose of destroying Christianity in the end. The Giovanni Venetians would further infiltrate England at many levels. Their philosophy of science and education took over Oxford and Cambridge universities. The children of King Henry VIII, including Elizabeth I, who was related in part to the pro-Venetian Howards, were all tutored by professors connected to Venice. Also, royal courts, offices, and universities would become filled with Kabbalists. One of the most influential Giovanni Venetians for English culture and outlook was Paolo Sarpi. He was supposedly a Catholic Servite monk, but his secret writings have revealed that he was an atheist. Ironically, he taught that kings had too much power. The Giovanni would operate through a merchant class controlled by Protestants, and most of them Puritans. Venice granted many trading routes to the Earl of Leicester, also known as Robert Dudley, who created the Venice Company. He supported the Calvinists of Holland, and he also supported the Calvinist Puritan movement in England. He also supported the privateer Sir Francis Drake, who many considered to be a pirate. In 1581, another English trading company, the Turkey Company, was created with Venetian approval. The Venice Company and Turkey Company later merged into the Levant Company, which later became the very powerful British East India Company. The very same year, 7 northern provinces of the Netherlands revolted against their Habsburg rulers. Queen Elizabeth I was asked to rule the united northern provinces, but she refused. But she did establish a protectorate of England and sent the Earl of Leicester as governor. The protectorate failed in only a few years, leading to the Republic of the 7 United Provinces, or Dutch Republic. The Dutch Republic was not recognized by the Habsburgs for many years. This appears actually to all have been planned by the Venetians. They wanted to create a republic even more potent than the original one actually in Venice, but in Holland and England. The Habsburgs retaliated with the Spanish Armada, but it failed disastrously to retake the Netherlands and also to destroy the Protestant Church in England. It's believed that the Venetians brought large amounts of gold and silver from their vaults of the Church of St. Mark's in Venice, and they brought it to the Dutch Republic and later the Republic in England. Queen Elizabeth I had her suitor Sir Walter Raleigh executed. He may actually have been executed because he wanted to keep gold and silver within England and only use bills of exchange for outside trade. This would go against the plans of the Venetians to control gold and silver and also to control global commerce. The Venetians would use dissenting church factions to disguise their activities and hide their ultimate aims. They appeared to influence the creation of Protestant splinter groups like the so-called Anabaptists. There were several Italian spiritualists and evangelical humanists like Giordano Bruno and others behind movements that evolved into Anabaptists. The Anabaptists were the biggest threat to both rulers and bankers. The so-called Anabaptists rejected infant baptism, so there was no birth record to sell to private banks. Many Anabaptists were either rabidly disobedient to rulers or non-militant. Either way, they were of little use to the ruling class and the bankers, other than acting to cover their real purposes. It appears the Venetians and other banking republics were really setting up the Anabaptists for their ultimate destruction. King James VI of Scotland was made King of England in 1603. He would be known as James I. He was supposedly chosen because he was a distant cousin of Queen Elizabeth I, who had no heir, but he was also related to the Guise family through his mother Mary, Queen of Scots. James I may have been really Catholic, and it's believed by some that when he took the throne of England and joined the crowns of England and Scotland, the Catholic Church secretly passed the mandate of Attorney Regis, or the Crown of Commonwealth, from the Spanish to the English crown. The Treaty of London between England and Spain and their sharing of New World trade is evidence of this. So the English crown then possessed 2 mandates of the Catholic Church of 3 mandates. These 3 mandates of the Catholic Church were symbolized by what's called the papal triple tiara, or triple crown, which popes occasionally wore by this time. This crown represented spiritual authority, temporal authority, and monetary authority. The crown was a development of the crown worn as far back as Pope Boniface VIII, but the crown, originally gold-plated, also represented the crown of Baal or Sybil. In 1613, Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of James I, married Frederick Elector Palatine of the Rhine. In 1618, Frederick was elected Holy Roman Emperor with the help of the nobility of Bohemia. This induced the wrath of the Catholic Habsburgs and triggered the 30 Years' War. It became really a war between the King of France and the Habsburgs. The war was devastating for Europe, especially for Germany. The war fit the scheme of the Venetians to make Germany Protestant and draw France into battle with the Habsburgs. So I'll continue in the next part with developments of the 30 Years' War and with the decline of the Spanish Empire and the rise of Britain and France, and also with global colonization. So until next time.